Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends. I want to give you a bit of an update on the latest from Rishi and the guys over there at the Treasury. They haven't totally destroyed the economy. They're now coming up with ideas of how to revive it. And you might have seen in the news, there's this number of 300 billion floating around. And, we've got to recoup this 300 billion, but the situation is far more perilous than 300 billion. That number is just the amount that Rishi has spent so far on these bailouts and the furloughs and that sort of thing. But what you got to factor in is that all these people that have been furloughed, a lot of them are going to go into unemployment afterwards. So we spend all this money to save their jobs, but they'll end up losing it anyway. They end up going into unemployment, which costs us more billions. And then also they're no longer taxpayers. So they used to all be taxpayers. Now they're no longer taxpayers. So the Treasury is spending money to prop them up, but they're also losing the income from them when they were taxpayers. Not to mention the lost economic growth of the country. So, the Treasury actually, understand this, and they've come up also with this number, which is much more in the small print of the news, of 1.2 trillion, which is going to be the cost of the lockdown over 5 years. And I did a video a few weeks back thinking the cost would be at least 2 trillion, and I stand by that. My experience with these financial authorities is that they always underplay the problem. They say, yeah, we got a problem, this is the scale of the problem, but later on we find that they've sort of underplayed it. So I'm sticking with the 2 trillion minimum, but 1.2 trillion is what Rishi is saying right now. And just to give you a little bit of context, Britain's GDP per annum is around about 2 trillion. And our debt is currently 2 trillion. So what we're saying is, okay, well, we've got 100% debt to GDP ratio, which is very, very high. And now we're going to add another, 1.2 to 2 trillion on top of that. So we'll be heading to about, 120 we'll be heading north of 150% of debt to GDP, probably closer to 200%, over the next 5 years, which puts our country in a gravely perilous financial position and not a good one. So, like I've said before, the other thing about this recession is we're going into it already in a weak position. We've got high debts already. We've got high consumer debts as well in our population. It's not like we're going into this recession where everyone's sort of flush with cash. We're going into it in a weak position, and we're getting even weaker now, thanks to the total mismanagement of, the country's finances. The other thing that's been going on through this lockdown, which I've talked about, is how we've anaesthetised the pain of lockdown for the people. We've kind of almost insulted the intelligence of the British people. They haven't been able to do their own cost-benefit analysis of the lockdown because they're getting money poured into them through the furloughs, through the bailouts, and this sort of rosy promise that once we come out of the lockdown, you can just go back to work, you can just go back to your job, no problem. And people are going to start finding here, if they're not thinking about it already, that not only is their job not coming back, but the demand for their company's products and services are not coming back either. So this is going to be this sort of second, they talk about the second wave of the virus, but it's really the second wave of unemployment. A lot of people have lost their jobs already, and they're going to be, going back to work and finding they're going to be losing their jobs. And also maybe people that had a really secure job, maybe they've worked through the lockdown, working from home. Those people are going to lose their jobs as well, because there's a significant reduction in consumer demand for their products and services. No one's got any money in the country, and anyone that does have any money or earns any money is not going to be spending it like they were before. They're going to be spending a lot less. So the other thing I think that's worth mentioning at this point is why we're not going to sort of recover going forward. And there's a couple of points I want to make. The biggest one of all, which is not talked about by anyone, is the psychological significance of the lockdown on the economy. You know, before the lockdown, we never thought, you know, anyone's ever going to lock down the country or the economy. But now we know that it can kind of happen at any moment. So what kind of insane lender's going to lend money to a small business based on, you know, 12 months worth of revenue or 52 weeks of revenue? Now it's going to be, okay, well, you know, we'll give you a loan, but we got to factor in that you might need 2 months out of the year in lockdown. And so, you know, we need to factor that into our loan. So you've either, as a borrower, got to pay significantly higher deposits, which they won't have, or you got to pay a higher rate of interest on the loan to recoup the lockdown or potential lockdown losses. And, you know, the government's also stirring the pot, talking about, you know, second wave and third wave of the virus. And this just promulgates the sense of fear in the economy, in the minds of buyers and sellers, to say, hey, you know, we don't want anything to do with this. And, you know, we're going to do as little as possible. We're going to take as few risks as possible. And, you know, we're not going to do any more than that. You've also got to bear in mind the moral hazard, which I talked about before, created by all the bailouts. We privatize profits, but we socialize losses. So companies going back to work, having had all these bailouts, they're not going to be worried about saving money. They're not going to be worried about investing it prudently. They're going to be thinking about, hey, why don't we just keep racking up debts? And, you know, next time we have a problem or next time we have a lockdown, Rishi will come in and bail us out again. So companies are being managed inefficiently. You know, you talk about the government propping up all these jobs, quote unquote, saving jobs. But what about if these companies need to shed jobs to be more efficient? So as long as the government's getting involved in private enterprise all the time, interfering with the invisible hand of the market, we're always going to have this misallocation of resources, which is going to dull the recovery. So we've got lockdown risk, which is an impediment to recovery. We've got moral hazard, which is an impediment to recovery. We've got misallocation of resources through government interference, which is a impediment to economic recovery. And also, obviously, Rishi is going to be imposing, you know, significant tax and, you know, burdensome regulations and all this sort of thing. So I've got a quote here from the Treasury about their own worst case prediction for the economy. And it says, you know, we could go through an L-shaped recovery, meaning economic output would remain below current forecasts for the next 5 years, leading to a large structural deficit and a budget deficit running to 1/3 of GDP. So those debt numbers I've mentioned to you, you know, it's annual debt accumulating, you know, on each other. So if we get up to 1/3 of GDP in 1 year, that'd be a deficit of about 800 billion a year. So, you know, we're easily going to make the 2 trillion number. It is probably going to be even higher than that. And I think just to summarize in this video, I mean, Boris Johnson came in promising to, you know, inject money in the NHS, and I'm no fan of you know, healthcare or government healthcare, but, you know, a lot of people are. Through this crisis, this lockdown, we're going to end up spending the equivalent of about 7 to 8 total NHSs, you know, for value that I can't, you know, communicate or ascertain or understand. I don't know what the benefit is for all these trillions in spending. But, you know, so 7 or 8 NHSs, if you're blowing all that money over there, how are you investing more in the one NHS over here, right? I just can't see how that's possible. So, you know, I think that's just a total fraud. I'm sorry that I can't provide a better picture of the situation. I mean, my position's always been on the lockdown one against civil liberties, but from an economic point of view, and economics is something that interests me a lot, the whole thing's a total disaster, and you know, it's gonna hurt our living standards going forward. I think Rishi and the guys, you know, are clearly not qualified to govern. They're a bunch of rank amateurs, and they need to go, and we need to get people in there that actually know what they're doing, that can pursue pro-growth policies, which is what I'm all about, and restore confidence to the market again, which these people cannot. So hope you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.